There is a study that most coffee drinkers have never seen, and once you understand what it found, you will never look at your morning cup the same way again. Researchers tracked more than 1 million people across multiple countries and measured one variable: how many cups of coffee they drank per day. When they analyzed the data on type 2 diabetes risk, what they found was the opposite of what most people expect. Regular coffee drinkers had significantly lower rates of the disease. That finding has since been replicated by institutions across 3 continents. So here is the question that study does not answer. If coffee is this protective, why are millions of people who drink it every single day still watching their blood sugar numbers climb? The answer is not only in the coffee itself, it is in how and when it is consumed. And the gap between coffee working for your metabolism and coffee working against it comes down to 3 specific variables that almost nobody explains: the timing relative to waking, what gets added to the cup, and what time of day the last cup is consumed. Get those 3 things right, and coffee becomes one of the most metabolically useful habits in your daily routine. Get them wrong, and the same drink quietly elevates cortisol, disrupts overnight glucose regulation, and reduces the effectiveness of the very compounds that make it beneficial in the first place. This video is about the difference between those 2 outcomes. We are going to go through the biochemistry of how coffee interacts with blood sugar, why the most common coffee habits in adults over 60 tend to undermine that chemistry, and what the research shows about the preparation and timing that actually maximize the benefit. Stay with this. The most important piece of information in this video is not at the beginning, it is coming later, and it involves a preparation mistake that is almost universal among people who are otherwise doing everything right. To understand why timing matters so much, you first need to understand what coffee is actually doing inside the body at a biochemical level, because it is far more specific than most people realize. Coffee contains hundreds of bioactive compounds, but 2 of them are primarily responsible for its effects on blood sugar metabolism. The first is chlorogenic acid. The second is trigonelline. Chlorogenic acid works by inhibiting an enzyme called glucose 6-phosphatase, the enzyme your liver uses to release stored glucose into the bloodstream. It also reduces the activity of alpha-glucosidase, the intestinal enzyme responsible for breaking down complex carbohydrates into absorbable glucose. An important scientific note here: chlorogenic acid's influence on glucose absorption and carbohydrate digesting enzymes is most pronounced when food is actually present in the digestive tract. The compound needs a working context, active carbohydrate digestion, to do what the research describes. Drinking coffee on a completely empty stomach removes that context. The compound is present, but the process it modulates is not yet meaningfully active. Trigonelline works through a complementary pathway. Research published in the European Journal of Nutrition found that trigonelline improves post-meal glucose uptake by supporting insulin receptor sensitivity. It also appears to slow the rate of gastric emptying, which further moderates the speed of glucose entry into circulation. A review of 30 studies published by researchers at the Karolinska Institute, covering nearly 1.2 million participants, confirmed that both regular and decaffeinated coffee are associated with approximately a 30% reduction in type 2 diabetes risk, evidence that the primary mechanisms are not driven by caffeine, but by these polyphenolic compounds. One additional mechanism worth understanding. Some researchers suggest that part of coffee's protective association with diabetes risk may come from its effect on behavior and lifestyle, specifically the physical activity and movement that often accompanies regular coffee consumption. Caffeine has a stimulating effect that increases energy expenditure and encourages movement, and that physical activity itself improves insulin sensitivity and reduces diabetes risk. The relationship, in other words, is deeper than a single compound acting on a single enzyme. This matters because it means the benefit of coffee is partially about what it does chemically. and partially about the active lifestyle it supports. Both are real. Both are worth understanding. The first mistake involves something that happens in your body before you take a single sip, and it involves a hormone that is already elevated when you wake up. What happens when caffeine meets that hormone is something most people with high blood sugar have never been told. That is next. The most common coffee habit among adults over 60 is also the one with the most well-documented negative effect on blood sugar. Drinking coffee immediately after waking, before eating anything. Here is the physiology that makes this a problem. When you wake up after a night of sleep, your body is already in a state of cortisol elevation. This is not a sign of stress. It is a normal circadian process called the cortisol awakening response. Your adrenal glands produce a surge of cortisol in the early morning hours, specifically to mobilize energy for the transition from sleep to wakefulness. Part of how cortisol does this is by signaling your liver to release stored glucose into the bloodstream. Your blood sugar rises before you eat a single thing. Caffeine amplifies this process. It stimulates the adrenal glands directly, triggering additional catecholamine release, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, which further activate the liver's glucose release mechanism. An important nuance here: the body adapts to caffeine's cortisol-stimulating effect relatively quickly with regular use. Habitual coffee drinkers tend to experience this response less intensely than those who drink coffee occasionally. This does not mean the effect disappears entirely, but it does mean the degree of impact varies from person to person and tends to be more significant in those newer to regular coffee consumption or those who are particularly sensitive to cortisol fluctuations. A study published in the British Journal of Nutrition measured blood glucose levels in adults who consumed black coffee immediately after waking versus those who waited and ate first. The group who drank coffee on a fully empty stomach showed notably higher morning blood glucose levels. That elevation occurred before a single gram of food was consumed. For someone whose fasting glucose is already elevated, even mildly, that is not a negligible effect when repeated daily over months and years. The solution has two components. First, drink a glass of water before anything else. Second, wait 30 to 60 minutes after waking and consume a protein-containing food before your coffee. Why protein specifically? Protein helps stabilize blood sugar by slowing digestion and stimulating gut hormones that promote satiety and moderate glucose response. It also provides a more stable metabolic environment before caffeine enters the picture. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology confirmed that consuming protein before caffeine intake significantly reduces the cortisol-driven morning glucose spike compared to caffeine consumed alone on an empty stomach. The practical protocol: water first. Then 30 to 60 minutes later, a protein source: eggs, unsweetened plain yogurt, a small portion of cheese, any whole food protein will work. Then coffee. That sequence changes the metabolic environment caffeine enters and converts a potentially counterproductive morning habit into a beneficial one. The second mistake is what gets added to the coffee itself, and this is where the research is more decisive than most people realize. Sugar in coffee, regardless of the type, creates an immediate glucose load that adds directly to your body's glycemic burden. An important clarification here: sugar does not fully cancel out the effects of chlorogenic acid. The compound continues working. But sugar introduces a rapid glucose rise that works in the opposite direction of what you are trying to achieve. It adds to the blood sugar load at the exact moment the coffee's compounds are trying to moderate it. The net benefit is meaningfully reduced even if it is not eliminated entirely. A landmark study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in early 2025 by researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health analyzed data from 3 large American cohort studies and separated participants by how they consumed coffee. The finding was specific: plain black coffee, no additives, was associated with a 10% reduction in type 2 diabetes risk for each additional cup consumed per day. When coffee was consumed with sugar, that protective association was significantly diminished. The coffee itself was not the variable. What was in it was. Artificial sweeteners present a different but equally significant concern. Aspartame and sucralose, the two most widely used, have been the subject of growing research into their effects on the gut microbiome. A study published in the journal Nutrition in 2021 found that both compounds alter the composition and metabolic activity of intestinal bacteria in ways that can compromise glucose regulation over time. The effect is indirect but measurable. If you require some sweetness in coffee, natural stevia is currently the additive with the least evidence of negative metabolic effect based on available research. The practical rule is straightforward. Black coffee for the metabolic benefit. If that is not realistic immediately, reduce the amount of sweetener progressively over 2 to 3 weeks. The palate adapts faster than most people expect. One additional consideration. Instant coffee products in sachets should be examined carefully. Many commercial versions contain added sugar, hydrogenated fats, and flavor additives that compromise the nutritional profile significantly. Natural ground coffee, preferably 100% Arabica, freshly brewed, preserves the highest concentration of chlorogenic acid and trigonelline. The third mistake is timing the last cup too late in the day. Caffeine has a biological half-life of 5 to 6 hours in most adults, and in some individuals, particularly those over 60 whose liver caffeine metabolism slows with age, that half-life extends to 7 or 8 hours. A cup consumed at 3 in the afternoon means that half of the caffeine is still circulating at 8 or 9 in the evening. That circulating caffeine continues stimulating cortisol production, keeps the sympathetic nervous system partially activated, and disrupts the transition into deep sleep architecture. This matters profoundly for blood sugar for a reason that is often overlooked. The majority of insulin sensitivity restoration happens during slow-wave sleep, the deep, restorative phase of the sleep cycle. It is during this phase that the body clears inflammatory signals, restores cellular glucose uptake responsiveness, and processes the hormonal balance that determines how well insulin functions the following day. When caffeine disrupts deep sleep, that restoration is incomplete. The result is reduced insulin sensitivity the next morning. Chronically disrupted sleep and chronically elevated fasting glucose are directly connected through this pathway. It is a self-reinforcing cycle. Late coffee disrupts sleep. Disrupted sleep worsens glucose control. Worse glucose control makes the next day's energy more unstable, which drives the desire for more stimulant later in the day. The practical guideline for most adults over 60 is to consume the last cup of the day by early afternoon, no later than 1 to 2 p.m. For individuals who metabolize caffeine more slowly or who notice sleep sensitivity, noon may be the more appropriate cutoff. Before we get to the 3 strategic timing windows that make coffee actively beneficial for blood sugar, and the 1 preparation addition that research consistently shows amplifies the effect, I want to pause for a moment. Because what we have covered so far is the corrective foundation. What comes next is the part that turns a neutral or harmful habit into something that works with your metabolism. It is the most practical section of this video. If you are watching this because you want to understand your health at this level, mechanistically, evidence-based, without anything being oversimplified or sold to you, then Golden Glow Senior is exactly what you have been looking for. This channel exists for one purpose: to give people over 50 the research clarity that most health content never provides. Every video is built from the evidence up. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications. You will not have to search for this kind of content again. It will come to you. And the next video in this series covers a completely different mechanism in glucose metabolism that almost no one is talking about. You will want to be there for it. Subscribe now, then let's finish this. Now that the 3 mistakes are clear, here is what the correct protocol actually looks like, and why each timing window is metabolically distinct. After the morning cortisol peak, 30 to 60 minutes after waking, after protein. As described earlier, water first, then protein, then coffee. The reasoning goes deeper than cortisol management alone. When chlorogenic acid enters the digestive system with food present, it has an active substrate to interact with. Carbohydrate digestion is underway, and the compound can do what it is designed to do: moderate the pace of glucose absorption and hepatic glucose release in a context where those processes are actually occurring. Protein before coffee creates the metabolic environment where the coffee's active compounds are most useful. Window 2, 20 to 30 minutes before the main meal. Pre-lunch coffee. This is the timing window with the strongest direct evidence for post-meal glucose management. Drinking a small cup of plain black coffee 20 to 30 minutes before the largest meal of the day allows chlorogenic acid and trigonelline to establish their regulatory presence in the intestine before the glucose load from food arrives. A study conducted by researchers affiliated with Brigham and Women's Hospital and published in Diabetes Care found that coffee components, specifically chlorogenic acid and trigonelline, significantly reduced glucose and insulin concentrations in the first 15 minutes following carbohydrate consumption compared to placebo. The reduction in post-meal glucose spike when coffee was consumed 20 to 30 minutes before eating was consistently more pronounced than when it was consumed with the meal or after. Post-meal glucose spikes, even transient ones, are among the most significant drivers of cumulative insulin resistance over time. Moderating those spikes consistently, meal after meal, day after day, produces a fundamentally different metabolic trajectory over months. Window 3, within 30 minutes after physical activity. This is the timing window most people have never considered, and it represents a genuine opportunity that most adults over 60 are not using. During and immediately after physical activity, including moderate walking, skeletal muscle becomes dramatically more glucose receptive. Muscle contraction activates GLUT4 transporters independently of insulin, pulling glucose from the bloodstream without requiring additional insulin signaling. A critical scientific point here: this GLUT4 activation is caused by the exercise itself. The physical activity is doing the primary work. What coffee does in this window is enhance and extend that post-exercise glucose clearance effect. It amplifies something that exercise already initiated, rather than creating it from scratch. A cup of plain coffee within 30 minutes of finishing a walk works with the mechanism that movement already triggered. Think of it as extending the window rather than opening it. There is one more variable, and this is the insight that changes the most for people who are already doing the timing correctly, but still not seeing the blood sugar shift they expect. It involves a single addition to the coffee itself, something that most people have in their kitchen right now. And the mechanism behind it is more specific than most people realize. That is next, and it is the part of this video worth sharing. Here is the insight that tends to change the most for people who hear it for the first time. Cinnamon contains a compound called methyl hydroxychalcone polymer, or MHCP. This compound has been studied for a specific and unusual property. It partially mimics the molecular behavior of insulin at the cell membrane level. Insulin works by binding to receptors on the surface of cells, triggering an internal signaling cascade that activates glucose transporters, GLUT4, to move to the cell membrane and pull glucose inside. MHCP from cinnamon activates a portion of that same signaling pathway through a different binding mechanism. It does not replace insulin, and it does not stimulate pancreatic insulin production. What it does is potentiate the response to existing insulin, making cells more efficiently responsive to the insulin that is already present in the bloodstream. A review published in the journal Nutrients found that regular cinnamon consumption was associated with meaningful reductions in fasting glucose levels across multiple controlled trials, with effects most pronounced in individuals with prediabetes or mildly elevated baseline glucose. A separate meta-analysis in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics found that cinnamon supplementation produced statistically significant reductions in both fasting glucose and post-meal glucose response. Now, a critical and commonly misunderstood point about cinnamon types. There are two main types of cinnamon, Ceylon and Cassia. Both contain a compound called coumarin, which at high doses can be hard on the liver. But here is what most people get wrong. Cassia cinnamon contains dramatically more coumarin than Ceylon, not the other way around. Cassia is the variety found in most grocery stores, most spice racks, and most commercial cinnamon products. Ceylon is the variety sometimes called true cinnamon, and it contains only trace amounts of coumarin by comparison. This is why Ceylon is the recommended choice for daily use. Not because it is more potent, but because it is significantly safer for regular consumption. That said, moderation matters even with Ceylon. Half a teaspoon per day is what the research supports and what this protocol recommends. More is not better. Like any bioactive compound, the benefit comes from consistent, appropriate use, not from escalating the dose. The practical protocol: half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon stirred into the morning coffee. The heat of coffee does not degrade MHCP meaningfully. It dissolves partially, blends easily, and the flavor is compatible with coffee in a way that most people find pleasant or at worst neutral. When combined with the correct coffee timing, post-protein in the morning, pre-meal before lunch, the cinnamon addition works on a parallel and complementary pathway to chlorogenic acid. Chlorogenic acid moderates the pace of glucose entry. MHCP from cinnamon improves the efficiency of glucose clearance at the cellular level. These are two different points in the same metabolic process, and addressing both simultaneously produces a meaningfully different outcome than either compound alone. Half a teaspoon, Ceylon specifically, every morning, in the coffee you are already drinking. Put together, this is what the evidence-supported daily coffee protocol looks like in practical terms. On waking, 1 glass of water, no coffee yet. 30 to 60 minutes later, a protein-containing food, eggs, plain yogurt, a small portion of cheese, any whole food protein source. Then 1 cup of plain black coffee with half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon stirred in. 20 to 30 minutes before the main meal of the day, a small cup of plain black coffee. No food yet. This is the pre-meal window where chlorogenic acid and trigonelline have their strongest effect on post-meal glucose moderation. Within 30 minutes after any physical activity, another cup of plain coffee if desired. This supports and extends the post-exercise GLUT4 glucose clearance window. That movement has already opened. Final cup. No later than 1 to 2 p.m. for most adults. Earlier for those with sleep sensitivity. Total daily consumption. Most of the large-scale research identifies 3 to 5 small cups per day as the range associated with metabolic benefit in healthy adults. More than that begins to produce diminishing returns, and in some individuals, cortisol effects that work against the glucose management goals. What changes when this protocol is followed consistently? Based on the available research and the physiological mechanisms involved, the effects appear in a predictable sequence. In the first 1 to 2 weeks, the most common changes are morning energy stability, less of the post-coffee jitteriness that comes from cortisol amplification, and a reduction in the mid-afternoon energy crash that frequently follows an elevated post-lunch glucose spike. By weeks 3 to 4, individuals who monitor their blood sugar tend to see measurable changes in post-meal readings, particularly after the largest meal of the day, where the pre-meal coffee window is being used. Fasting glucose, which reflects overnight and early morning glucose regulation, tends to improve more gradually, often in the 4 to 8 week range. As the cumulative effect of improved sleep, reduced morning cortisol amplification, and consistent chlorogenic acid activity compounds over time. These are lifestyle strategies grounded in solid evidence. They work alongside medical care, not as a replacement for it. If you are on medication for blood sugar management, any protocol changes belong in a conversation with your physician. Ideally one where you bring the specific research and let the numbers from consistent monitoring make the case. Before the conclusion, I want to say something directly to you. If you have watched this far, you have not been looking for a quick list. You have been looking for understanding, for the mechanism behind the advice, for the kind of information that actually changes the decision you make tomorrow morning, not just tonight. That is the entire purpose of Golden Glow Senior. Every video on this channel is built the same way. Evidence first, mechanism explained, no products, no shortcuts, no agenda. Just research-informed clarity for people over 50 who want to understand what is actually happening in their bodies. If that is what you want more of, subscribe right now. It costs nothing. And share this video with someone in your life who drinks coffee every day and has ever been told their blood sugar is a concern. That conversation starts here. Subscribe, and let's finish this. Your body is not indifferent to the choices you make each morning. Every cup of coffee you drink is either supporting the metabolic processes that protect your blood sugar or quietly undermining them. The difference is not in the coffee. It never was. It is in the timing, the context, and what goes into the cup. Chlorogenic acid and trigonelline are real, well-studied compounds that do measurable things to glucose metabolism, particularly when food is present and the digestive context is right. Cortisol and caffeine together on an empty stomach produce a measurable glucose response that works against you. Ceylon cinnamon added to a correctly timed cup works through a completely separate insulin sensitization mechanism that compounds the benefit. And deep sleep, protected by not consuming caffeine too late, is where insulin sensitivity is restored every single night. Physical activity also plays a role in this picture that goes beyond just burning calories. It is one of the most powerful triggers for GLUT4 activation that exists, and coffee consumed in that post-exercise window extends a process that movement already started. None of this requires a supplement purchase. None of it requires a radical change to your diet. It requires understanding what is already in your cup and making 3 specific adjustments to when and how you use it. Water first, protein before coffee, coffee before the meal, cinnamon in the cup, done before early afternoon. That is the protocol. That is what the evidence supports. Start with one change tomorrow morning. Build from there. Your next blood test will tell you more than any single video can.